Pastor, doesn't science disprove the Bible?
Isn't Genesis just a fairy tale?
Is God for real? Did he really create everything in 6 literal days?
Didn't God just use the Big Bang?
Why is there death and suffering? Do you really believe the Bible?
Didn't man evolve from apes?
For answers to these questions and more, stand by for Believing the Bible.
Welcome to Believing the Bible. This is Scott Lane with Terry Reed, Dr. Carl Williams, and our producer, Ed Salzwedel, all directors at the San Antonio Bible-Based Science Association. We're here to reassure you can believe the Bible from the very first verse. Today, again, we have a special guest in Dr. Pgm Cserhati, who has a PhD in biology and a BS in computer science. He works at the UT Health Science Center, San Antonio. Carl, you had a question for Dr. Cserhati.
Well, one of the criticisms that we hear frequently from the evolutionists, the Darwinian camp, is that creationists really can't be thinking people, so they must check their brain at the door when they go into church and listen to stuff about Genesis, and then they go to work. If they go into some sort of scientific field, they must not really believe creation if they're really working in science. Now, as a PhD, was that a problem for you?
No, I think that statement is patently false because fundamentally I think that it's a question of now, is creation scientific? And I think it is. Basically, science did not begin with Darwin. I mean, that would be a very arrogant statement that all science started with our point of view. And I think that both evolution and creation, we both interpret scientific facts are the same, but the interpretations are different. And basically, I can quote Genesis chapter 1, verse 28. And God blessed them, and God said unto them, Be fruitful and multiply, and replenish the earth, and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over every living thing that moveth upon the earth. And this verse from Genesis basically says, is basically a mandate for science. We can see the mandate for, God commands human beings to do science in the early pages of Genesis. Since if we have to subdue the earth, and if we have to have dominion over it, we must understand and know what nature is like. Therefore, God here is mandating us to do science in order to go over the earth and to use it wisely, of course.
Now, as far as when you went through your PhD training, education, how much did you have to plow through evolutionary stuff before you actually got to the real science?
Well, the thing is that we learned a lot of different facts in different subjects, about genome sequences, PCR techniques. But the thing is that we were given consistently an evolutionary interpretation of these facts. But I realized that if we take the same facts, we can give a different explanation to them. Let me mention, for example, that in taxonomy class, evolutionist teachers were sort of forced to admit that many species went extinct in some sort of deluge-like event. Mm-hmm. Now, we as creationists, we recognize that this was the Genesis flood. For example, I went on an fossil hunt excursion with a paleontologist. We went to the Gerecse Mountains, and on the mountains on the top of a hill, like in an elevated position.
Okay, where would this be at?
This would be west of Budapest, just west of Budapest. And we started digging, and then I found like a bed of ammonites, which are sea creatures, but they were found elevated at the top of a hill. Or, for example, we were learning molecular genetics, and the genetics professor was wont to admit that in the genetic past of the human species, genetic variation underwent a bottleneck effect, meaning that genetic variation in the human genome was very constricted at some fairly recent point in our history. And again, we can recognize that they would give it some sort of evolutionary spin, but we as creationists, we recognize that, again, this was Noah and his sons. This was the flood of Genesis.
So you don't see your faith interfering with your research in science, you see it promoting it.
Absolutely. I mean, I see absolutely no contradiction. Now, evolutionists themselves, they stress objectivity, and so what I think is that then fine, very well. Let's start with objective facts, with evidence, with like sequences or species or fossils, and let's look at them. And I mean, we are not beholden to any one specific interpretation. I think that evolutionists are very authoritarian. They tend to stress that, well, everybody's an evolutionist. They're appealing to authority, but I appeal to facts. Let's study the facts then. Let's see how these fossils they fit in. We see that genomes tend to devolve, that the mutations destroy existing genetic material. So they can explain it all they want, But I believe that if we look at facts, at the scientific data itself, creation can give a much stronger explanation. That's what I think.
You are listening to Believing the Bible. This is Scott Lane with Terry Reed and Dr. Carl Williams. If you would like to learn more, go to sabsa.org. That is sabbsa.org. Today we have Dr. Matthew Cserhati with us, a biologist. I am sometimes asked during seminars and discussions I have, what do you think is the best evidence for creation? And one of my answers is DNA. Why do you think genomics refutes evolution and proves creation?
I think genomics it refutes evolution because basically, fundamentally, mutations, no kind of mutations adds information to the genome. Like, for example, we talked about like different bacteria, that they sort of acquire a new trait, and that's basically because that there's a repressor molecule which is repressing another gene from being expressed. But if this repressor mutates, or if it's taken away, then this other gene can express. So therefore, even though we're losing genetic material, this new trait, even though it's being expressed, it's due to loss of genetic information. Right. Or, for example, evolutionists, as I said previously, that according to evolution, evolutionists have to explain how a bacterial genome transforms via mutations genetic information into the human genome. And the best that evolutionists can really do is a process called duplication and diversion. Now, a science paper has described that the whole genomes of plant species can be duplicated. You've got all these tons of new genetic material, but these lineages don't really lead to new species. For example, in human, we can see that there's a trisomy, there's a duplication of one of the human chromosomes. I think 3 chromosomes can be duplicated. You have a bevy of new genetic information, but the poor individual ends up with Down syndrome, and that's not an evolutionary advantage.
Correct.
So fundamentally, the process of mutations, they don't add to the genome; they're detrimental, very much akin to like thermodynamics. That natural processes, they don't build up; they're rather destroyed. That genes fall out of the genome. Genomes tend to break up. There's like a continuous slew of newer genetic mutations which cause disease in the human genome.
That sounds very much like the work that John Sanford has done.
Yeah, it is. In our pre-show, you were talking about there's almost an organic association between communism and evolution.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
There is a strong organic connection between evolution and communism. Karl Marx dedicated Das Kapital, or Capital, to Charles Darwin. And so basically what communism says, based on articles, I've read dozens of articles, science articles, written in communist Hungary in the 50s, 60s. They posit that first there was chemical evolution, and then biological evolution, then human evolution. Human evolution continues into societal evolution, and the communists, they stated that the ancien regime, the church, and the capitalist state will fade away, and that the communist political system will take over. And we will finally end up in a utopian state where everybody's equal, nobody believes in God anymore, and that will be the final station of humankind.
Carl, you were commenting that you ran into some people that objected to that idea at a debate you did some years ago.
Yes, one of the things we pointed out was that evolution was used as a basis for promoting Karl Marx's ideas into communism.
Absolutely.
And communism is the biggest killer of human beings in society in the past 100 years. Hitler killed his millions, but Stalin killed his tens of millions.
Yeah, and Mao killed more.
And Mao killed his hundreds of millions.
And Pol Pot killed some himself.
And so these are all communists who basically supported their belief in communism on evolution. Yeah. And evolution does have consequences. And people who are humanists and evolutionists must realize that their religious belief in evolution and humanism has dire consequences.
Yeah, I fully agree with that because if you look at communism, was the first atheist state purely atheist state led by atheist leaders, where atheism was like the religion, belief in God was completely denied. And look at what atheism, like a really strictly consistent atheistic worldview, leads to.
Mm-hmm.
In atheism, there's no value for life. I would say that we're just animated matter. You turn matter into another form of matter, and it doesn't matter. And so, if you believe in God, it says in Genesis we were made in the image of God, that God made us special. There's a value to our life. It's no wonder that so many atheists uphold abortion, which is one of the sins of our age. So I think that ever since Darwin, I think there was a philosopher who said that who foresaw that if Darwinism is widely accepted, then the gates of paganism and unbelief and death will be flung wide open, and it'll have an effect on the way people think today. And for example, you can also tie evolution to abortionism, because basically, in a single sentence, we, as a supposedly modern society, we're an enlightened society. We believe that we can harness our own evolution, our own anthropological transformation, that we will then decide who is fit and who is unfit, and call the unfit from our number, meaning Down syndrome, or people who have a genetic defect who are deemed undesirable. And this is precisely what Margaret Sanger expounded in her book Pivot of Civilization, who is a hero of the Gilead.
Eugenics, Francis Galton.
Thank you, Matthew, for your research. Information for creation events in our area are on our website's calendar page. For more information or to schedule a presentation, go to sabsa.org or call 210-599-7240. When you go to our website, you can click on a link to our newsletter. Our website has a link for contact information on which you can order our newsletter to be emailed to you, or you can call us. Also go to whyshouldyoubelieve.com. That is Terry's website, containing articles looking at current day issues from a biblical perspective. SABSA meets the second Tuesday of each month at 7 p.m. We are now meeting at Faith Lutheran Church, just south of the corner of Jones Maltzberger and Thousand Oaks. There you will find biblical apologetics and creation science teaching found nowhere else in Bexar County, as well as the availability of books and videos on these important subjects. If you miss any part of this show, you can listen to the show anytime by going to AM 630 KSLR, the Word in South Texas website. Click on KSLR Podcast, scroll down until you find Believing the Bible. Please join us again next Saturday for Believing the Bible. I'm Scott Lane, and for Terry Reed, Dr. Carl Williams, and Ed Salzwell, thanks for listening, and we hope you found today a reason to believe the Bible.